Today, Rory was speaking about theory of mind.
Yes, there's lots of psychological theories that we learn or come across in our journey through our practice lives. And one is theory of mind. It's attributed to a psychologist called Simon Baron-Cohen, but actually it was initially introduced by David Premack and Guy Woodruff. This theory examines the capacity of individuals and their mental states, like beliefs, intentions, desires, and emotions. And it sits within what they call developmental psychology. Developmental psychology is effectively the positioning for understanding empathy, socialization, and communication. However, over the last few years, it's come under scrutiny for its accuracy, particularly within the autistic and neurodivergence community, because it has some implications and limitations, mainly because the theory suggests autistic individuals inherently struggle to interpret other people's mental states, leading to a perception that they lack empathy, which we know isn't true. And as a consequence of that, in my mind, it's becoming just a little bit redundant, Ken.
I guess it depends where it is applied. I'm going to go through that definition. It says theory of mind, or TOM, is the cognitive capacity to attribute mental states such as beliefs, desires, intentions, and emotion to self and to others. This understanding allows individuals to predict and interpret the behavior of others based on their mental states. Theory of mind is crucial for social interactions and communication. So that is the definition. Now, I'm going to give an experiment that was done that indicates what theory of mind is all about. One of the experiments was that I would be in a room with a child, maybe that's a young child of maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I'd take a Lego brick and I'd hide the Lego brick under a basket in the room. The child sees me hiding this little yellow Lego brick. And then I walk out the room. In walks Rory. Now, Rory walks up to the basket where the child has just seen Ken put the Lego block. Rory lifts up the basket, he takes the Lego box, and he goes and he puts it in a different place. He puts it in the toy box. Now, the question that is asked to the child is, when Ken comes in the room, where will he look for the Lego block? Now, if the child sees Ken put the Lego block under the basket and leave, and then Rory move the Lego block, then the child would have a theory of mind, thinking Ken's mind doesn't know Rory's moved the Lego block. The child might say, Ken will look under the basket, because they're understanding how I might think and act and what my beliefs as Ken might be, not knowing that Rory mischievously removed the Lego block and put it under the box. So there's an example of theory of mind and Lego. And it's the suggestion that a neurodivergent person may have difficulty understanding another's theory of mind. And I can see what led him there. I really can, because I know from my own personal journey, I sometimes find it really difficult to figure out what other people mean if they're not being direct and speaking openly and unambiguously. But yeah, I think therein lies the controversy.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think with theories, if people are rigorously applying theories in practice, that then becomes the difficulty, doesn't it? Because we meet the clients where we are. And I guess it takes us neatly to another theory by Dr. Damien Milton, who coined the term the double empathy problem. And his approach is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more thoughtful. And he thinks that empathy problems are two-way. As someone who's neurotypical, we have to make the effort to try and understand the frame of references of someone who's autistic. So it's a two-way street. Communication in general is a two-way street. And theory of mind, it sees autistic communication as a deficit. It sees it as their problem, not something to be worked on in a kind of dual relationship. The double empathy problem is as much a problem for neurotypical people as it is for autistic people. And what we have to do, those who are neurotypical, we have to find a way of communicating so both the person who's autistic and the person who's neurotypical can communicate. Reading between the lines, we help that person by meeting them where they are.
Yeah, I like it, Rory. Different, not deficient. And maybe there is a neuro bias and therefore the world has been set up in a certain way, and when an individual is unable to interact with the world that has been set up that way, then it is classed as an inability or a disability to interact with the world in that way. And we've spoken before about how you can liken neurotypical and neurodivergent to two different operating systems, like a Mac computer and a Windows computer. It's a different operating system, but it is capable of doing the same kind of jobs. And something that's interesting for me is that there is a product called Microsoft Word. It's built by Microsoft, who are a computer platform-based organization. They build computers. They do not build Macs. Only Apple build Macs. Yet, Apple Macs can now operate Word and the Microsoft suite of offerings. However, I've been a long-term Mac user, Rory. In the beginning, it was the bane of existence because Microsoft products didn't work effectively on Macs. But now it's been understood and worked on. Now the two work seamlessly hand in hand. And that's all that it is. It's a difference in how we process. So there's a lot of interesting movement on this topic, Rory.
There is. And I think also we need not to overgeneralise. Not all autistic people experience theory of mind related challenges. Autism spectrum and social skills vary greatly between individuals. Both you and I are neurodivergent, and if you met us, we're very different people. So I think from a therapist's perspective, if someone comes and says I'm neurodivergent or I'm autistic, is to try and see who the person is as opposed to working to labels or immediately falling onto theories. Our profession is about communication. I was thinking last night about this, and it's a bit like going to a rural area of France and complaining that the people don't speak English. I mean, when I asked for something, they had no idea what I was talking about. And the idea is that that person in France isn't any less of a person or less intelligent. They interpret language in a different way, and the enlightened amongst us may buy a phrase book or try to communicate in a different way, not just dismiss people because they're not speaking your language. People are individual, and we must try and meet people where they are and work hard to get in someone else's frame of reference. For some clients, that might be quite an easy step for a therapist to do. But for some, and not just neurodivergent clients, it may take a bit of work and negotiation. So communication is the lifeblood of our work, of our profession, and understanding that some people understand in a different way, I think, is essential.
100%. I was on a forum recently for digital nomads over the age of 50. I put a comment on this group and I said, the challenge for me is I'm neurodivergent, so I find social interactions really difficult, very draining. I think it would be a challenge or a barrier for me to be a digital nomad, going around the world to towns I didn't know and having to speak to people I didn't know and strike up conversations. The comments that came back suggested that when you go to another country and you cannot speak the language well, that there is a meeting in a different place from the people, that generally in the smaller little towns and suburbs, maybe not so much the main big cities, they will try different ways of communicating. And there were many neurodivergent individuals that are digital nomads that said it's easier to go to a foreign language country as a neurodivergent person and meet people and talk than it is in their own country, because there is an allowance. I don't understand you correctly. We're going to do the best we can to help one another. And I think that's what we're getting at.
Absolutely. And just to pick up on that question of language, if we think of our travels when we've been abroad and how different it is when we ask for very basic things and are not understood, I think is a good starting point, because that is sometimes how a neurodivergent person feels when they're talking to someone and the person just isn't getting them. And what Ken has alluded to is putting the effort in, putting the hard miles in, and making an effort to find a common ground. And I think when we do that, that shared endeavour really does make a difference, because if you can't get some kind of reciprocity, you can't get into the frame of reference, then you're not really in the work. What you're doing is you're struggling to communicate. So I think theory of mind and just understanding autism in general and being accepting of the clients who are neurodivergent or autistic is so important, because they do miss out. They have
Yes.
therapists, they don't understand and won't put the effort in. And as a consequence of that, some, I think a majority, because they don't know, they have lack of knowledge. But it must be awful. It would be like literally going to see a French therapist and they couldn't speak your language. And you sat there for an hour, you pay your €50, and then you go home and you think that was a waste of time.
If that person makes no attempt to communicate on your level, they just go, you know what, this is how we communicate, and you catch up. And every person is individual. Every person is their own unique person. We can't assume. There's not a stereotype. Because of stereotypes, I stepped out of practice when I got my diagnosis. It is the fault of stereotyping in my own mind from things that I'd heard. What I'd heard is a neurodivergent, an autistic person doesn't experience empathy. I'd read that somewhere or heard that somewhere. It is not true at all. But when I got my diagnosis, I thought, wow, I really got to examine, do I feel empathy? What is that? And I had to question that and step out of practice for a little while. I came to terms with that. So when we hear about theory of mind, it has its place in child developmental psychology, with the child being able to understand what somebody else might be thinking because of what they see and what happens in front of them. But I don't know that it fits as well with neurodivergence. And I guess that's what the controversy is about.